Ladies and gentlemen, the topic of the next session is my most favorite one in the whole world, the green economy. If you really think that the environment is less important than the economy, try holding your breath while you count your money. The environment and the economy are really two sides of the same coin. In the future, we cannot sustain the environment. If that happens, we will not be able to sustain the economy either. Taking all things environmental, climate change is inarguably the biggest global challenge that we face today. India has made huge commitments to cut its emissions and transition itself to a more green economy. Amen to that. Let's talk more. I'd like to invite on the dais the speakers of this next session. Kavita Saha, Managing Director, Infrastructure India, CPP Investments. Good afternoon. Aye, please. Deep Gupta, Managing Director, Macquarie Asset Management, Co-Head of Southeast Asia and India. Good afternoon and welcome. Nagesh Basavanhali, Managing Director and Group CEO, Greaves Cotton Limited. Good afternoon and welcome to you too. Chaitan Maini, Co-Founder and Chairman, Sun Mobility. He will be joining us virtually, ladies and gentlemen. I'd also like to invite on the dais Neeraj Mohan, Partner, Trilegal. Good afternoon. Are you please? And Utpal Bhaskar, Chief of Bureau, Mint, is all set to moderate this green session. No stop, no look, just go, 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 go green. Here comes, according to me, the most important panel of this summit, the green economy.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks for making time for this. There couldn't have been a better panel than this to discuss this. I've been covering this space for a few years now, and from a time when green used to be more like a CSR kind of an option for companies rather than a pure play business. And how has the world changed? It's from the commitments that we have made at COP26, and these are not only commitments that they have been made, it's absolutely intrinsic for us to follow through if countries like ours need to have their position at the global table as well. Thanks a lot for making out time for this, and obviously the hall here is here to listen to you. I'm only here to moderate. I would like to start this discussion with Kavita. In fact, from your early years of investing in green in this country and infrastructure, how has this been for you, the experience? Primarily because obviously we were having this chat a minute back where he said that problems, one of the refrains was the problems remain the same, nothing much has changed. Or has it changed actually?
So thank you, Utpal, and I would say that what has changed is the scale and scope of investments, the direction of investments. I mean, when I started investing in India, I mean, I was investment banker for many years before that, but when I started investing, people were still investing in coal-based power, and from there, I think we have seen a sea change in the availability of opportunities in the green space. So I think one is how the direction of what is available has changed. Nowadays, I think everybody talks about investing in green power, but you see very few, or if none, which come from the regular channel in old, the fossil fuel-based power. Secondly, when renewables actually even started as an opportunity, the individual size of the projects was very small. I still remember a time in 2006 on advising a project which at 120 megawatt was probably the largest renewable power facility in the country. And now you are talking about hundreds of gigawatt scale projects. And commensurate with that, I think the size of the investment opportunity, where there is a lot of capital which is wanting to come in and invest, and you have projects which are of that scale where capital of scale can come in and invest. I think that's the change that we have seen.
The scale. What about the problems? The problems have been the same or have they changed? As in, has there been some kind of a, because the government says, at least from the part of the government, that there's enough traction and all the impediments have been removed. Has that been the case? Because you are the guys who are actually putting money where what you're talking about.
I would say that the problem which still continues to remain to some extent is that of the financial health of the discoms, and who are ultimately the counterparties to most of these projects. But even then, I think that the problem has been recognized, and while there have been announcements by the government to address the financial health, the tangible step that they have taken is that now you have the federal entities, the NTPC, the SECI projects, which are actually trying to take the role of the counterparty, give a measure of confidence to people who are investing in these projects, and thereby increasing the credit profile of these projects.
Right. So obviously, discoms there has to be someone who pays you for the bills that are being raised. Also, green per se, earlier the landscape was all about solar, wind. Now, this landscape is also very rapidly changing. So there's storage, there's hydrogen, there's green hydrogen. We are talking about RPOs. Deep, I wanted to get your views on this in the sense that when you go overseas, when you talk to people around the world, how do they perceive this green economy story for India? Because as she rightly pointed out, someone has to pay for what is being out there. It cannot be more to do like a intention which comes across very well for the climate. It has to be sustainable economically as well, and also obviously for the environment as well. So in your interactions with the investors globally, how do they perceive our green story?
I mean, if you look at the world, I think there are three regions which kind of drive a lot of innovation. I would say US, China, and India. And so India is always on the radar. It's not something that people are not looking at. Everyone's looking at India. There is a start and stop which happens in India. So if you went back and looked at the infrastructure investments that we did earlier, and by we I mean the investing community, people who are foreign investors who are coming to the country, you would see that they face challenges in the greenfield side of things, right? And so people have evolved their strategies to say they can be brownfield, which does mean that a lot of infrastructure capital would like to see some certainty around regulations. Unfortunately, it's not possible, and I agree with you. The green economy bit is not just renewable energy; it's green hydrogen, it's transmission assets which come, it's waste to energy, waste management. Everything gets covered in that green economy. So I don't see any reason for why investors would not look at this. A lot of our limited partners do ask us questions about what we are doing with this. And so there's a lot of interest. I think the change is that you will have to tailor the capital, and I think everyone can understand that. You'll have to tailor the capital to the respective sector. So if there's something which requires $20 million of seed capital to start the business, for that, you'll need a different kind of capital. If you are looking at an operating solar asset, you'll need a different kind of capital. So as a shop, Macquarie's and my business, Macquarie Asset Management, is just making sure that there are different pools of capital with investors available. They are available, I think, at different cost and different risk profile. But to be fair, it's very positive. I mean, my view of what's happening in India is very, very positive. We are one of the economies which is driving a lot of innovation globally, and people are watching us. So I expect a lot of capital to flow into pretty much everything that we've talked about, but especially in green economy.
Right. So transition is the big story of our times, and in corporates have been, so in my limited conversations, we find that there is this huge focus towards how, so for example, there are large industries, large captive power projects. You then want to get onto this because obviously it's also cheaper as well. You don't want to depend on a grid which is expensive. I wanted to get Chetan into this conversation. Chetan, you were the guy who saw it all coming, right? I still remember the vehicle. In fact, it was absolutely, some would say that it was much before its time, and then maybe Tesla caught up. So, the story that's unfolding right now in India is the story of energy transition. Mobility is a very, very important part of it, and electric mobility as well. There are all different kind of models which are being looked at right now. What are the difference that you see from when you were doing this and now? Obviously, you're still in the thick of things. But what is the transformation that you would have seen over a period of time? As a country, are we behaving differently?
Yeah, I think there's been a sea of change right now. I mean, I launched Reva a little over 21 years ago, so it's a long time. If you look at it from a macro level, you know, where energy prices are today for renewable versus where they were, that's a huge shift. You today have it cheaper than gasoline equivalent. Look at where gas prices are at a micro level. The commitments being made at a macro level related to climate change and policy, right? So, you know, we didn't have subsidies, we didn't have concessions. Today, you have the famed subsidy in the country. You have a host of positive policies, the recent battery swapping policy network that's come in on this front. If you look at technology, battery prices were, you know, $1,500 a kilowatt at that point. They're less than 10 times that. If you look at where motor electronics have gone, look at your cell phones and try to extrapolate that into what you're seeing today in electric vehicles, you're seeing a huge shift on this area, on technology on this front. If you look at the financing available today, you know, the number of startups that have been financed to that been done 20 years ago. So in, you know, and of course, areas of the ecosystem available, people and capabilities, it's a much flatter world today in terms of technology and access to the information. So I think what we've seen is a lot of things that have never come before together have come. If the oil crisis in the 70s was a challenge, you didn't have tech at that point. And if there was a resurgence in the 90s, well, you still had issues around oil prices and energy security areas. So I think today is the right time where all the macro conditions have come, and it really paves the way of electric mobility, but integrated much better with energy. What you're trying to see today is how does energy and mobility come together. And clearly the government's new policies, thought process around swappable batteries is a step in that direction where it's actually saying that we're now sharing batteries, we're looking at energy and mobility linking each other together, which allows renewable energies to come into mobility, where the impact would be, you know, significant, right? If you think of India today, you know, if all our vehicles were electric this year, highly unlikely, we would probably consume, you know, 25 to 30 gigawatts of renewable energy, which is far less than what we produce today. And if we fast forward this to 2030 and say that all vehicles were electric, what would be needed in terms of renewable energy, you know, we need probably around 250 gigawatts, which is probably less than half our target of renewable energy, which means that India at a level has theoretical capable of running its transportation on the sun, renewable energy. If you think of the impact that would do to $180 billion oil import bill, it's huge. So I think it's about this linking of energy and mobility that I see is going to be the big shift in the next 10 years. That's going to make a huge impact at the sustainability level and at the cost level.
Also, from a national security perspective, given that we are talking this at a time when interesting things are happening in different parts of the world as well, we never thought we would see a time when there would be a kind of a concerted action on strategic petroleum reserves. Countries acting in tandem didn't do much to moderate the oil markets, at least. However, the prices are now coming down. It's say around $102 per barrel from the scare that we saw around $138. Obviously, we didn't go up as high as 147. But I wanted to get Neeraj into this conversation. Neeraj, one of your constant refrains has been the problems are there, we all know. Financing is the big issue. Climate finance has to play a role. The budget this time, which was presented, which talked, there was a huge focus on climate, as in, for whether it gets translated or not into action is left to be seen. But like every government, at least the intentions have been announced very prominently. Your take on this?
So yeah, so you, as you rightly said, I've been usually critical and pessimistic about what the governments are doing or they should be doing. But actually, to give credit to what we have seen happen over the last 2 years through this COVID phase, I think without actually completely destroying the apple cart, the central government has tried to do whatever it could, at least for furthering the green economy and the whole green industry. And it's been done by a variety of quick fixes, like coming out with an amendment to a rule or coming out with a notification. So they know what the problem is. They immediately reacting to the problem, probably not in the most legally robust manner, but at least addressing what the issue is. So from the government's end, I think we have seen tremendous efforts into bringing this sector up to a level where it can attract serious capital. And when I say serious capital, I mean serious foreign capital. But again, if you talk about financing, like you mentioned, what is probably hindering more financing in the sector is still the sort of perception of risk and the inability of those investors to probably appreciate the risk in totality and find ways to mitigate it. So, like, everyone knows what the issues are. There's nothing new, and we've been talking about this for the last 5-8 years since this industry has been booming. But I think the trick is now to figure out a way to live with that risk, to mitigate that risk, and still make money. And that is where that the various forms of innovative financing in the green industry is very much required, where the risks are brought to a manageable level and you still make money.
In fact, very quickly I wanted to ask you this, and I also wanted Kavita and Deep to weigh in on this as well. How do you price risk then? Say, for example, how do you calibrate risk? It's a federal structure. While the center can keep on talking about things which sounds very nice, at least on paper, at the end of the day, it's the states which needs to carry this forward. So in such a scenario, and these states are nations in themselves. You just look at the size and the number of people these particular services cater to. How do you do that then?
So I guess the answer is to look beyond the state, right? All this while, the dependence of this whole bankability of DISCOMs, bankability of NTPC, bankability of SECI, I think we need to look beyond that, because there's a huge market outside of these agencies that the private capital can tap into. You look at at least that's what the government is also trying to tell the market. See,
the CNI space is a
absolutely. I mean, you look at the changes that the government is trying to bring in terms of must-run status, open access, ISTS waivers. These are all measures to encourage the industry to saying, okay, stop selling to the DISCOM. Don't only rely on the DISCOM. Go out and sell to the private consumers. And if you look at 8 years back, when serious foreign capital started following renewables, they came in and they put their weight behind DISCOM PPAs, SECI, NTPC PPAs, right? And the sector boomed. If that same serious capital were to now put their weight behind CNI and private PPAs and a variety of other sort of variations of virtual PPAs, synthetic PPAs, whatnot, right? If that same interest and same sort of money can follow these new avenues, in the next 5 years, you'll see that market which is as robust as the current SECI and TPC market.
Right. Kavita, how do you, given that, Neeraj raised a very interesting point. These are grandeur statements as well as the center makes. How do you really see this playing it out in the states? Because ultimately the projects are there, the off-takers are there, money has to come from there. How do you manage it then?
I think one of the organic ways in which this risk has been addressed over time is the cost of supply. Maybe 10 years ago, renewables were supplying power to the grid at a very different price point. Today, the price points that we are talking about, which are competitively discovered and which everybody knows is very finely priced, it just makes sense for the state to have more renewables in the mix, right? So it is no longer a good to have, it is a good economic sense for the state to be buying power from renewables. So I think one part of that is addressing the cost of supply. The other part is the way that the market, treats the not so good states in the bidding process itself. So you'd actually see that the price which is discovered for states which have good credit risk or for, NTPC SECI type projects are very different from the amount of bidding activity and the price at which the more delinquent states are able to get powered, right? So in a sense, the market is pricing in delinquency, the market is pricing in, or rather the bidders are pricing in delay, and that is built into the price. So I think the reward really for the state is to kind of be credit worthy, is that it will just get larger power at much better rates than those states which are delinquent.
Yeah, and given that there's a huge focus on manufacturing, if you're able to bring down the pricing of electricity, which is a huge cost into manufacturing, you'll be able to attract more industries as well. Deep, how does this play out for your projects when you take these calls?
See, the two parts. One is commercial. So, we all know India is a big country. There are different states. They are like countries themselves. So you, as a very technical way of looking at it, you do the modeling based on the credit rating of the state and the appropriate discount rate. So that's very simple. I think the other point, which is more sort of fundamental, and this now I've talked about in every conference that I've been to, which is the regulatory certainty. India is an emerging economy. You differentiate yourself from other emerging economies, and I look after Southeast Asia as well, is by having a certainty around the contracts that you sign. And so it's very simple. It's not very complicated. Some of the risks that we see today are based on, obligations around the contract being breached, and those contracts, not enough thought having gone into what the obligations would be in the future, right? So I would say I also look after the road sector, and there you've seen over a period of time the concession framework coming to a level where it's a lot more bankable. You don't have a lot of challenges, and obviously it's a lot more driven by the center, so you've got that thing to sort out. But in general, I would say commercial is very easy to solve for and try and take the risk. It's the regulatory 0-1 risk which people are worried about. So I would say the government, and this is not new to the green economy and the sectors we're talking about, it's true for pretty much every sector. If the regulations are a bit more stable, people are always happy to come.
So are we a rules-based regime? After what has happened in states such as, and I'll take names here, say this Andhra, Telangana, Gujarat, so-called the poster state for investment, and where a lot of these things were first stabilized. How does that then pan out?
I think in general we are rule-based. It's just that there is, in most assets, especially in assets like infrastructure, we've invested a lot of capital up front. You do need some certainty. You can't wait for things to linger on for 5 years, because in that period the project can actually die and you could have NPAs, and then banks will have problems. So the reality is, I think that there is a fair judicial process in place, which could be followed more swiftly.
All right. That's a very interesting way to answer it. As you rightly said, you absolutely gave me an answer, which is like, for people who report on the subject, so obviously we keep on looking for stuff, which then, if a large investor like you has a view about a state, it absolutely makes the headlines then. I wanted to get Nagesh into this conversation. Nagesh, the story of Indian industry right now is of transition, which is how Indian industry is going to play a part in this energy transition. Large corporates, and I'm talking about some of them, have been doing business in a certain way, and has worked out very well for them, and that's the reason why they have achieved the scale that they have been able to do so. For an industry in which you operate, how has industry been receptive to this change? And what has been particularly your playbook about this?
Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. When you look at the industry that we operate, we are in the mobility industry, which is probably going through one of the biggest disruption that mankind has ever seen in terms of the deepest technological disruption, right? When an opportunity like this comes along, there's an opportunity for newer areas to emerge, not just in terms of technology, but also business model disruptions. So how are industries grappling with it? I mean, obviously, everybody goes through that. I mean, there are new age companies that have come in. There are the incumbents have jumped in. And I think both, at the end of the day, have an opportunity, because the opportunity size in India is huge. When you just look at the last mile mobility in India, And then when I look at the two-wheeler, three-wheeler population, right, that makes up close to about 80% of the population, right? We are talking now pre-COVID, that's about 20 plus million, 20 to 22 million, right, pre-COVID. And then you make it up, 75+% of that is up for grabs. Point number one, right? The size of the pie is big. Unit economics is coming down. Chetan touched upon that in terms of the energy prices dropping over the years. I mean, short term, I'm going to not talk about the last 1 quarter, but when you look at it long term, right? Also, it doesn't take too long. You go to a Delhi street in November, and I think you get the answer, right, in terms of what we need to do long term. So when you look at a fuel agnostic policy, and you touched upon whether it is clean CNG or hydrogen or in the future electric, right? Some of this is inevitable. And when it comes, and then you have an S-curve happening. Other countries like China have seen this happening. Today, China's electric two-wheeler population, or the mobility population, is about 35 million two-wheeler scooters, right? And both new age companies and traditional companies have succeeded. So the industry itself, we see a huge opportunity for change. The things are coming together. The government has also played a huge part in this with the addition of the FAME 2 and then the state governments jumping in. And in a place like two-wheeler and three-wheeler, the infrastructure is not such a big issue that you would hear in a four-wheeler. So I would say the time is ripe, and I think you will see.
Sorry to interrupt your chain of thought. You mentioned FAME. Now, FAME started with a big bang, didn't do much. So that's the reason why we see this new avatar of FAME, so to say. Also, and particularly when we talk about mobility, aren't we again putting ourselves, and I would love Chetan to come in on this, that if you look at, you're talking about things like lithium, you're talking about some of these minerals which are not around here. There's already a lithium triangle which has been taken care of by China. Don't we run the same risk that we ran in terms of crude? Because obviously, as a government as well, you cannot bet on one technology. You will have to let the market decide which technology does better. There are different, science evolves, and there are new plays which is happening out there. On the mobility part of this, and Nagesh, I would like you to answer this, and then obviously I'll pose this question to Chetan. Are we not falling into the same trap that we fell in earlier, which was maybe in this case of solar, where manufacturing happens in China? Similarly, while PLI and other schemes are there, but at the end of the day, you need the raw materials. You cannot just imagine them to be where you want them to be. Your views on that?
Yeah, I think fair question. When you look at what's different this time, even compared to recent times, right? One of the things that FAME did well was not only, of course, providing the subsidy, but also insisting on a local manufacturing policy. That was a key. So when I look at my own vehicles, which are the high-speed two-wheeler, right, or the city-speed two-wheelers, more than 90% of the products or the subcomponents are coming from Indian manufacturers. That was a difference compared to the solar industry, right? And lithium cells, to your point, yes, the battery chemistry today, it's lithium. Tomorrow, it could be something else. We've already heard of certain companies looking at sodium and others, right? That will evolve. Are we dependent on lithium cells for a Japan or a China or a Korea, I think, or some parts of the world? I think the answer is yes today, right? Will that change in the future? Probably the answer is yes. So when I look at it, the ability of moving people and moving cargo is not going to go away. We need to move people, we need to move cargo. When you have like-to-like comparison, rupee 50, roughly, at 75 rupees of petrol, right? Typical IC engine costs you 1 rupee 50 paisa or something plus at 75 rupees, yeah? A typical electric two-wheeler costs you about 20 paisa per kilometer or less. When you look at the cost economics or the unit economics, and over the life cycle of the product, I mean, I think the answer is there. Short term, yes. How do you manage the lithium? How do you manage that? How do you make sure that you're not indebted to a particular area or region? Fair point. I would let Chetan take that on. Thank you.
Thanks. I think lithium is an important part, but if you just take as an example the same scooter, and today we use, say, swappable batteries on it. The cost of the lithium is, first of all, in the cost of battery, half of it is electronics and everything else, and the half of it is the cost of of the actual cell. So if you start from a lakh of rupees, let's say the battery was 50,000, in which then the electronics, which the actual cells were maybe 20,000 or so, 25,000, and in that, a small percentage of that is lithium. So net, that may be 10,000 rupees or less. If you look at over the next 7 years, the amount of energy that same vehicle will probably use on this area, it's going to be 54 that. So if you look at from a total amount of import bill from a country point of view, yes, we may switch, we will not have all the raw materials, but the quantum of amount we need will be significantly lower. And it will be important for us as we scale the business in the next 5 years, that like we have strategic alliances for oil, we will need certain strategic alliances for lithium reserves with countries that have surplus on that area, right? At the same time, what's also happening is the energy density is going up every year around 10%. So with the same raw materials, you're getting 10% more energy, or you're going to use 10% less amount of raw materials to gain the same amount. So the amount of raw materials is reducing significantly. The third is the recycling process is increasing significantly better today than it was 5 years ago. And in the next 5 years, it's only going to get better. And so you're going to be able to recycle these batteries and then use lithium from that on this area. And the last thing is alternate technologies are now coming in, which they always do at this point as one raw material goes up. And we've seen that when, we've been pretty good inventing those things, and that's been happening here. So I don't see that as a challenge for us industry in the next 10 years. I think for us, the challenge is how quickly we can execute and get and be part of this. This ecosystem change has happened globally. It's growing at a phenomenal rate. And how does India step up itself as it achieves a higher level of electrification in the next 5 to 7 years?
Right. Thank you, Chetan. I wanted to ask Deep this question. Deep, you briefly mentioned about the stability of rules. You talked about the certainty, if there is a certain kind of the idea being do not change the goalpost once something has been put into play. You also take care of a region which is huge. How do you rate India vis-a-vis the others?
I think India is quite mature compared to Southeast Asia is what I would say. And obviously Southeast Asia is a mishmash of economies, and if you include Singapore, that's a developed country. The rest of it, most of it is Philippines, Indonesia. I would say India is quite relatively quite mature compared to those. And when I meant by mature is that we always keep, usually the discussion in India is about cost of capital and are you going to make the right return. You end up getting good assets, so you'll find a good well-run solar asset, but you'll have to pay for it. And what I mean by good well-run is that there'll be a contract, there'll be lenders who are locally available, there'll be consultants and technical operators who are available in the market, and you can find some deficiencies here and there, but you can fill that up. You would have the right governance practices available, and you can get the right talent to run it. So it's usually a lot better than what I find elsewhere, but I'll not generalize, because some of the other companies, like in Philippines, we own a company which is the largest geothermal company in the world, 1.5 gigawatt of capacity. They run it very, very well. So I wouldn't generalize, but in most cases, I would say that India's journey is far ahead of the rest of the region.
Very comforting. Anita, how would you? Kavita, my apologies. Kavita, how would you? The Deep answered this question about how India is far better than others. In your opinion, because while you do take care of this market, and obviously in your models you see that what's happening elsewhere, how do you rate us? Both on as the maturity of this space and also on the regulation side of this.
So I would say with regard to maturity, the exciting part of being in India is that there are so many other aspects of green which have not yet been explored or which are in very initial stages, right? So a lot of us still look at green as basically from the renewable power generation space, but there is that entire ecosystem of how power is scheduled, how it is delivered, how it can be enhanced by technology, which are not yet in the scheme of things. They are in a very nascent stage. The other part, which is you come at it from the green part, but the other part is that how do you reduce the gray in the gray to green? Things like carbon capture, which are again in a very, very nascent stage. And that is actually the direction in which we are seeing other more developed markets, that play starting to come. So I would say in terms of the opportunity, is the most exciting thing. The other part which I referred to in my opening remarks about scale, we are seeing larger and larger scale, which enables large investors to come in and invest.
A very quick question there. So are you referring to stuff which is happening behind the meter? Is that what is you're referring to? Say, for example, today, why should I have a modem in my house? Why should that meter that is there take care of everything? So, for example, and there are all kind of things which are being planned right now. This is the Internet of Things which has been talked about. There's a reason why I see players like Jio coming into this space. In fact, a lot of people weren't able to figure what was the big play out there. But we see that smart metering, 250 million households needs to be put with smart meters. That is the reform-led scheme which is being talked about. Is that what is the kind of going forward when you look around? Obviously, you're looking at new opportunities as well. Are those the sectors that one needs to look out for?
I'm just talking about concepts like, we have a platform which provides the technology where household users can schedule when do they want to run their laundry depending on the price of power at that point of time.
Day of
right?
time,
so,
yeah.
So I think these kind of concepts, plus also the more, usual kinds of concepts like enabling industry to replace DG sets and engines with, things like battery storage and natural gas power. So I think it is basically what incrementally you can do to in the spectrum of gray to green. So not only renewable power generation, but also the myriad ways in which you can improve the way that that things are done.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks. And I think that's my cue. And thank you for this discussion. Also, it's also very fascinating to say that from the days when when we started this conversation, when I mentioned that it used to be more like a CSR, and certain film personalities used to be the largest investors in green energy purely for the tax purposes, the sector has absolutely turned a corner. Thank you, everyone. Over to you.
Thank you to the moderator. Thank you, Utpal, for holding these proceedings together.